Hello and welcome at Moneycontrol. We are delighted to be joined today by the Minister for Communications and Northeast, Mr. Jyotiraditya Scindia, also one of the leading lights of the Modi cabinet and MP from Guna. So thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you, Naren. It's always a pleasure to be with you and Shweta.
Thanks very much. In your in this tenure as minister, you have talked about the goal of Bharat as a telecom superpower. You've met various stakeholders recently. You've set up committees. So if you can tell us a little bit about what your vision for the ministry is now and for the telecom sector, what kind of targets you've set, and what kind of reforms we can expect.
So let me start by saying that telecom is an integral part of any country's growth potential today in the world. Telecom is no longer only a means of education, of communication, but it's a means of education. It's a means of garnering information, and information equals knowledge, equals IP, equals innovation, equals success. And therefore, telecom has become an integral part as I mentioned, any country's growth story. India has leapfrogged to that extent in the last decade under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership. Whether you look at mobile connectivity, where penetration has grown to close to 85% with 116 mobile subscribers, whether you look at internet connectivity, which has grown from a low base of 20 crores to almost 95 crores, 67% penetration rate. And at the same time, the economies of scale argument has come into place, where when revenues rise, then cost of service falls. If you look at telecom rates, which were roughly at 0.51 paise per minute in 2014, today it is 0.03 paise per minute. So it's slashed by 96%. The same holds good for internet connectivity. 1 GB of internet connectivity used to cost 287 rupees. It now costs 9 rupees. So that's down by 94%. Having said that, I think it's important for India to ensure a couple of things. First, the Prime Minister's imperative that we need to be Atmanirbhar. If indeed we are going to translate our goal of Viksit Bharat into reality, then India must be Atmanirbhar, i.e., must produce its own equipment and technology. And therefore, his insistence with regard to that, at least with the government-owned telecom service provider, which was with BSNL, we have now got our own 4G technology, one of the only countries in the world, the third country in the world, to have its own 4G stack, which means not only the core, but also the RAN, the radio access network, along with the BTSs, and the core and the RAN combined with the data centers. We're in the process of rolling that out today for BSNL, our 4G stack. And it's been a Herculean effort. I must commend all the organizations that have worked together with one goal, one vision, and one plan to make that happen. The technology is now proven. The POC has been proven. We are now in the process of rolling that out. TCS, along with CDOT and Tejas and BSNL, are working together in a project management unit to roll that out. We have a target of rolling out 1 lakh BTS towers over the next 6 months to a year to be able to have 4G penetration. So that is one of the very key goals. The second is 4G saturation. In our country, we need to ensure that the access to information goes down to the last village. And that too has been the Prime Minister's imperative. Whatever we do, we must do with saturation. And so there are 22,000 towers odd that still need to be erected across 10,000 villages in India. This is not limited to the government company by itself. It's across all TSPs. So all 4 TSPs are working assiduously at that. It's something that I'm monitoring on a daily basis. And so 4G saturation must happen as well. Along with that is the PLI. It's important for India to become, we're already the mobile phone manufacturer of the world. But I think it's important to become also the telecom equipment manufacturer of the world. And for that, we have launched the PLI scheme, which has paid very rich dividends. We need to ensure that the proliferation of that and the greater adoption of that happens, both in terms of equipment manufacturing and equipment R&D. So that would be also one of the things that I would look at as an imperative. Finally, the Telecommunication Act has also been put in place. It was passed by Parliament last December. We have put it through the Gazette notification route this June, which gives us a window of 180 days to make sure that all the rules are out. We have 23 sections and 35 rules that need to be pushed out. And we are monitoring that on a weekly basis as well. Finally, I am also responsible, most importantly, to my customers. And I must make sure that the ministry must make sure, the telecom ministry, that we have quality of service in place for customers, i.e. no call drops, no intermittent issues with regard to communication on the mobile phone, as well as to reduce the number of spam calls and fraud calls that come through the system. TRAI has already passed a regulation to that effect in the last 15 to 20 days, and we must see execution of that happen as well. So broadly, those are the things, along with putting in place 5G labs and all of those things that we are also looking at.
Mr. Scindia, you have a daunting task. You mentioned that you are answerable to the customers of India. We've seen the telecom market shrink substantially from a whole host of players. Now we're down to 3 big players. And is that a situation that you're comfortable with? Because ultimately consumers must have choice. And you also mentioned about telecom tariffs, which are low, but we've seen tariff hikes that have come in recently.
So thank you for your question, Shweta, but I think it's important that Moneycontrol also does a deep dive in terms of what's happening in the world prior to looking at what's happening in the Indian market. We have 4 players in the Indian market today. If you look at any country in the world, I would dare say that no country in the world has more than 2 to 3 players in their domestic market, right? So we are very comfortably placed in terms of the number of players that we have. So we've got to look at how the global industry in telecom is working when we look at the perspective of how the Indian industry in telecom is working. Sure. So to the answer to your first question, we have enough players in India. 4 players is a decent amount of players compared to what the world is looking at on a countrywide basis. Your second question with regard to tariffs. So there are 3 or 4 things that are at play today. If you compare the rate of a package in India, which if you look at 70 SMSs, 2 GB of data, plus a number of calls that you make, India is priced at roughly about $1.89 for that package. The US is priced at $40. Developed countries are priced somewhere between $12 to $35. Developing countries are priced upwards of $9. So suffice to say that we are the cheapest in the world.
So also our per capita income is,
yeah. So let me finish. The second point that I'd like to make is that, as I mentioned before, in the last 10 years, tariff for voice calls have fallen by 97%, from 0.53 paise to 0.03 paise. Okay, you're talking about 0.03 paise. Data costs have fallen by 94%, from 287 per GB to 9 rupees per GB. Okay, that's on the one hand. So you have a declining cost structure for consumers over a decadal period. On the other side, you've had the fastest rollout of 5G in the world happening in India. You started in October 22. In 21 months, you rolled out for 5G across the country. You've got 4.5 lakh BTSs that have been set up for 5G. Now, what does that mean? That means that telcos have gone through a capex plan of 4.26 lakh crores over the last 2 years. The last tariff hike was 3 years ago, right? This year, there's been an 11% tariff hike. What does that mean? That means that your cost per minute has gone from 0.03 paise to 0.033 paise. Your data cost has gone from 9 rupees per GB to 9.9 rupees per GB, when it used to be 287 rupees per GB, right? So if we are expecting companies, whether it's government, private sector, etc., putting in that amount of capex there has to be a return for it. And when you've seen declining costs over a decadal period, and the last tariff hike being imposed 3 years ago, prior to 5G being rolled out, and a 4.26 lakh capex cost, being Moneycontrol, I'm sure you understand the economics of that argument.
So on the first point that you had made in the answer to the first question about the India stack and the indigenous technology being rolled out with DOT and TCS and so on. Now, a number of countries have also been in touch with India to use some of this indigenous technology. Now, how do you see that happening? And also this India stack, do you see this as an alternative to, say, Chinese technologies around the world as we go forward, once this is up and running?
Oh, absolutely. I think if we successfully roll this out, and I would wait until mid of next year. We are already rolling it out as we speak. We've got 22,000 towers that have already been put up. Our core network is working across all 4 centers. Our data centers are up and running. So we already have live customers on 4G as we speak. So it's no longer a POC. It's no longer a proof of concept. It's actually in execution as we speak. And when we roll out our 1 lakh BTSs, then I'm very, very confident that this is going to be an alternative technology. There are only 3 countries in the world that have this technology, and India is going to be one of them. Let me also add, in terms of a question that you've not raised, that the movement from a 4G to a 5G technology is only going to be incremental from this 4G technology. The 4G core can be used for 5G as well. The only change that you'll probably need to bring about is adding a couple of BTSs onto the towers. So it's going to be just incremental and not a monumental change to switch from 4G to 5G. However, we'd like to first make sure that 4G is stable and running well, and then move it to 5G.
We recently had the 5G spectrum auctions. The response was not as encouraging as one would have hoped. Any analysis, any thought on what really happened? And since this is the last question, we also want to get a sense from you on BSNL and Vodafone Idea.
So let me take the first question. I think the auction was tremendously successful, and let me explain you why. We had 8 bands of spectrum that were put out. We had auction bids that came in for 4 bands of spectrum. Please do also understand that this is on the back of a very large spectrum auction that took place in 2022-23, where we sold almost spectrum worth almost about 1.5 lakh crores. And that was for 4G, 5G technology. So this round of auction was only for those, mainly for those whose spectrum was expiring and they required more spectrum. So let me give you a flavor of that. The 5G bids that went in mainly were for 3,300 megahertz and 26 gigahertz spectrum, which were taken up last time. Of the total 10,500 megahertz that we put up for auction this time across the 8 bands, close to about 9,900 megahertz was in the 26 gigahertz and 3,000 megahertz spectrum, which is for 5G. Right. So actually what you were putting up for auction, because we put up all the remainder for auction, actually what you were putting up for auction was only 531 megahertz, and we sold 141 of that. So you almost sold close to 30-35% of what you put up for auction, and you garnered 10,000 crores out of that. Also, let me give you the breakup. The renewal part of the spectrum across the major players was about 40-45% of that 141 megahertz that got sold, and the balance 60% was for additional spectrum that they took to service their needs on those spectrum bands, which were different from the 5G spectrum bands. So it was a very successful auction, I would say, on the back of this thought that we have already taken a huge amount of spectrum to roll out our 5G, and our 5G is today getting rolled out.
Okay.
So on
your second question was on BSNL,
on Vodafone Idea,
and Vodafone Idea has got its own professional management, and therefore what happens in the financial and operational workings of a company is their business and not our business as a ministry. As far as BSNL is concerned, we are EBITDA positive. We would like to see with the rollout of 4G, number one, good execution. Number two, QoS increasing, quality of service and customer sat ratings increasing for our customers. And if we're able to do both of those, profits will accrue from that line. Please remember that in life, your notion and your thinking should never be bottom line alone. It should be satisfaction of customers. If you have satisfied customers, the bottom line will come. That's theory number one of business.
Any timelines that you're working with? Any
Let me
targets?
first, I think our concentration right now is to execute 4G. Thank you very much.
May I ask a last follow-up question on Vodafone idea, which is that one, because this is coming up in Supreme Court tomorrow on the AGR, what's the government's view on that, on their questions about the AGR and so on?
I will
And
not
finally
comment on
the-
something that is coming up in Supreme Court.
And finally, on the as the largest stakeholder, any thoughts on increasing or decreasing stake in Vodafone?
Will you keep it alive? Will you
Not,
keep Vodafone
not,
alive?
we have, at this point of time, as I mentioned, it is the management of the company that has to decide what practice to follow. We would like a competitive telecom sector, and as the Ministry of Telecom would like, at the end of the day, the best quality of service and choice, as you mentioned, to customers.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much, Nalin. Shweta,
Thank you.
pleasure.